Hi, my name is Ben, and today I'm here to talk to you about modularization of your app and Android Instant Apps. I work in London on the Android Developer Relations team as an engineer, and I spend a fair amount of my time working with the Instant Apps team and the early access partners, as well as on samples. So at Google I/O 2016, we introduced Android Instant Apps, and we then closely worked with a set of early access partners and made the SDK generally available this year at Google I/O. So everyone now can build an Instant App. Android Instant Apps follows three main principles. That's discoverability, performance, as well as security and privacy. Today I'm going to take you through these key principles, and let's get right started. First off, discoverability. Discovering an app sometimes can take a little bit of time. What happens every now and then is you find an app either by browsing the Play Store, or somebody recommends it, or you literally just search for that and specifically find it, either with the Pixel launcher or in another way. Well, that's cool, but then you install it, then sometimes you forget about it, and through one or the other mechanism, you rediscover the app, and then you use it. That's the trodden path that developers have to deal with so far, and users are actively have this as well. It's really great, it works well, but we can do a little bit better than that as well. So what happens is there's basically a funnel from the user finds the app, then they actually read through everything, and they decide to install the app, and in the end, they use the app in a longer time, so you've got a proper retention rate on that. Well, like I said, there is quite a lot of friction in that, and we figured there has to be a better way to deal with this, and we wanted to reduce this. So let's take a look at the process with Instant Apps. Say Joyce sends me a link to BuzzFeed. I'm like, oh, cool, I wanted to see something about cooking, and I click the link. What then happens is the part of the app gets downloaded instantly, and I have the native app experience on my device. No friction whatsoever. I don't have to install the app. It's done automatically with the magic that the Play services provide, as well as the magic that's happening on your device with that. Simple. So we launched with 50 early access partners from across a multitude of industries. And like I said, this SDK is now generally available to every developer. And the amount of devices that we have that are enabled for Android Instant Apps recently has passed 500 million devices. That is quite a lot, and it's still working upwards trajectory on that, so it's going to be even more in the future. Well, that's all cool and stuff, but how does it work from a developer's perspective? Because I take that many of you in here are Android developers and want to know how you do that. So let's take a look at the high-level developers overview, how this works. Basically, your app is just a monolithic thing, right? So that's the one thing that gets installed on a device. That's the one thing you actually have to care about. That was the old world, and that's the installable app world. That's fine. But let's take a closer look at that. Basically, your app consists of multiple features, and those features sometimes have commonalities. And you can take all those commonalities and refactor them in multiple modules. Say you've got a feature A, you've got a feature B, and those commonalities, you put them in a base feature that those other features rely on. Still, the build output for your installable app will be one APK with all those features combined, and that's the same thing that will happen on the device. So you have this one APK that gets installed on the device. Within the Instant App world, what will happen, instead of getting an APK, you get a zip file with a multitude of APKs in there, which then can be uploaded to the Play Store. And the Play Store decides, depending on the link that the user clicks, which part of that will be installed on the device while not hogging too much of the bandwidth that is available, as well as space on the device. So let's see how this works on a device. When you click on feature A, what happens is the base module gets installed, as well as the feature A. When the user, on the other hand, clicks through the sideways on feature B, what happens is only feature B gets installed. But if the user clicks first on feature A, then walks his way through to the next feature, both of those can be installed. So every part of your app can be installed on the device at the same time, so the users won't really notice the difference, other than they don't have to download the app manually and go through the whole search and discovery process. So to recap that, you've got a more fine-grained control over features with cleaner edges. And with that process, you also can decrease the size of your app, which is good for the users as well. And with the new Gradle plugins, you improve your build times, as well as a side effect, you improve the testability of your app and can improve the architecture with that as well, which will increase your velocity during development in the mid and long run. In the end, it doesn't really matter what your app is. It's one app, be it before it's an installed app, as an instant app, or afterwards. So you can essentially run the same code and don't have to rewrite everything. There is some refactoring involved, though, but I'll come to that a little bit later. Let's take a look at the requirements and the specifications for instant apps on your device, as well as on a couple of tools that we can use on that. So it's available to devices running Lollipop and above, which is already a lot. And with Android Studio 3.0, we introduced a set of tools and plugins that developers can use to make Android instant apps work for them. There's the Instant Apps SDK that you can download. Also, there's new Gradle plugins for feature modules, which I just mentioned, as well as for the Instant App module, which we will take a look into those a little bit later. Also, there's the AppLink Assistant, which allows you to output a file that you can easily upload to your server to make the matching possible between the local app and your domain. Also, the emulator supports Android instant apps. All you have to do is set up a test account on that, and you can easily work with instant apps without having to have a device that is enabled with it. Also, there's a refactoring tool, which allows you to, for example, take one activity, click on the refactoring action, and instead of having to go through this refactoring step-by-step manually, you can just say, I want to refactor this into a module, and that, with all the code that's associated with it, as well as the resources, can be put into a separate module, and then you can start working with the couple of things that you have to do to make your app accessible as an instant app. So yeah, what do I actually have to do to get there, to make my app instant? So like I said, there might be some refactoring involved if you already have an existing app, depending on the structure of your app. Let's take a look at a couple of things that you definitely will have to do without going into too depth of the refactoring of the app. One of the things that you have, every app has, is a settings.gradle file if you build with Gradle. Otherwise, there's currently no support on other build systems for that. But for the settings.gradle file, all you have to do is delete the currently existing app module, and then replace that with base modules that you have refactored, the base module that you have refactored, as well as the feature modules, and have one new module that's the installed app, which basically correlates to your existing app module that you had before, and add a new module for the instant app. The only two relevant modules for the device output are the installed and the instant app module. But let's take a look through step by step. First off, the base module. In order to make sure that the base module works as intended, you have to mark it as a base feature. That's the only thing you have to do specifically for that. Also apply the feature plugin to have it either output a APK if you work in the instant app world, or a library if you work in the installed app world. For the other features that are depending on the instant app module, what you'll have to do is you just say, this feature is implementing the base feature. Also, you can have your dependencies scoped directly to the features that are using them. And I highly recommend scoping them as narrowly as you possibly can in order to avoid having a massively bloated base module in there. On the installed app, what you have to do is you still have the application plugin that you already had, and then within your dependencies, you have the dependencies on those feature modules that you had before. Very similar for the instant app. you just apply a different plugin. And that defines which output you will get, either one single APK or a zip file with a multitude of APKs. Also, in your manifest, there have to be some changes that you have to make. So if you wonder, is my app actually a good use case for Instant App? Well, yes. And you can think about that. If your app is addressable via a URL, then this is the use case for an Instant App as well. In order to make that all happen and to make it work, you have to have an activity that has the Android auto verify set to true in order to have the app links available, and you have to set the action view and category of browsable, and your default activity that you already have has to have the default category as well. Then you associate your URL to your activity, and for your default activity, what you have to do is give it some metadata to have a default URL that it can fall back to if none of the other ones is applicable. Also, one of the cool things that we introduced with Oreo is a new sandbox version. With that sandbox, we tighten security and make sure that we can migrate user data from the instant app to the installed app. More on that later. The next principle of Android Instant App is performance. So what does that mean for a developer? So main question is, how do I get from having this click to getting output and getting the app installed instantly? What does that take? One of the things is that's the science. That's how you have to constrain your app in size. You have to make it as small as you possibly can in order to transfer it as quickly as possible over the wire. So that's kind of scary, right? Because like refactoring everything and making everything as small as possible takes a lot of time. There's a couple of things involved, but actually it's not that hard. And while you're developing, there's no size constraint. So you can easily just work with it from just having those changes in the Gradle files without having to limit yourself without having to send the app on a diet. That's really cool for the first refactoring efforts, and it's also really, really helpful for the pitches to the team and for your product owners and product managers to actually show them, hey, this would happen if our app was an instant app. You can show this to them on their device and can take it from there. When you've taken the next steps towards that is when you upload your app to the Play Store for the first time to the development track, there's a download bundle size limit of 10 megabytes, which is still quite generous because that's not your whole app, but just a download bundle. When you move on to alpha, beta production, what then happens is you will be constrained to 4 megabytes per downloadable bundle. So it's 1024 to the power of 2 times the megabytes that you have. But what's with the bundle size? Bundle size basically means if your base bundle is quite large, say 3 megabytes, you could have features on top of that, which each are 1 megabyte. That effectively gives you 6 megabytes on device. But if you split those two features that were combined into 2 different features, you would gain another megabyte. Similar, if you can slim down your base APK, your base feature module, all your other modules can grow in size as well. I don't recommend just growing it for the sake of growing it, but you have ways to actually play around with that limit a little bit more effectively. So just to recap, stay under 4 megabytes. Yes, under. Like the lower you can go, the better it is, because it improves your user's experience from getting from the click to the installed application. So let's take a look at a couple of tools that we offer to make this easier for you as developers. One of them is the APK Analyzer. Some of you might be already familiar with it, especially if you just watched the session earlier today here at the Google Developer Days. This gives you good insights where your kilobytes are spent, and it works with installable apps as well as with instant apps. So you just drop the instant app zip in there, and you can see which of your modules takes the most size, and you can have all the insights that you want to have. That's really great. Also, in order to make sure that you divide your app into modules easier and have the output properly modularized, there's configuration splits. Well, that works with either screen density or the processor architecture type if you have native code, as well as the user's language. The cool thing about that is that you don't ship all the resources and all the drawables and everything to the user, but the experience is tailored to the user's device. So an HTTP device with English language would only get HTTP resources and the English language. Same accounts for processor architecture. So how do you enable that? That's straightforward. Within your build Gradle file, you enable generate pure splits, then set the density to true. That should be enabled. Depending on whether you have native code or not, the ABI part is essential as well, and you can split all the languages into your different into the different modules as well. What will happen is that all of those splits are being generated, and they will reside in their own APKs. And the Play Store decides this will be shipped, and the other ones, well, just don't take up space over the wire or on the user's device. Also, to further reduce your APK size, what you can do is use code minification, resource shrinking, ProGuard, or other things that we talked about at Google I/O or at other conferences already, like using WebP, make sure that your images aren't too big, make sure that you remove all the unused resources. But that has been covered in a wide variety of words already. So how does it work? Again, just for your release build type, because in development it doesn't really matter that much. You can minify it, can shrink your resources, or can use your ProGuard files for the modules that you're working with. Be aware that you have to have the API surfaces of your feature modules excluded from from ProGuard so that they don't get obfuscated, because otherwise the modules can't really communicate with one another. Also, one of the things is that you don't have to have everything as an instant app immediately if you consider working with instant apps. There may be features that are more suitable within your app to become an instant app than others. And your users will encounter that boundary in that case, which basically means that you have to have an install affordance at some point. These are two examples where you can have them. There's different ways as well. You could also have a modal dialog to show them this is where you want to go. This is now the place where you have to install the full application in order to continue with the app's experience. There's an API for that. Basically, you check whether you're running in an instant app context, and if you run it in the instant app context, you show the install prompt, which gives you the install prompt from the Play Store directly. Let's take a look at the next principle. That's privacy and security. One thing is the identity of the user should be easy for the user to log in. So don't have them fumble around with sign-up dialogues, with long forms that they actually have to sign in with if they are new users, or have them enter their password and username if they're existing users. You can use the smart log APIs for that to make sure that this is as quick as possible and as easy as possible for your users. Also for payments, for in-app payments, we already have the in-app billing API available. You can use that for digital goods, so everything that you have within the application, or like subscriptions, anything like that, works with that. But also if you want to ship something to the user and have physical goods available, or you want to bring the user somewhere, then you use the Google Payments API, which uses the cards stored in the Google user's account. When it comes to permissions, we made sure that this is secure for the users as well. We reduced the amount of available permissions for Android instant apps and the amount of requestable permissions, depending on the API level. So some of them are available down to Lollipop, and some of them are available only from Android Oreo and above. So your instant app could run in a foreground service, so this would be helpful for media playing applications. And it can read phone numbers, which is a subset of read phone state. Well, be aware with background services, they might be killed at the system's convenience when the user does not really use the app anymore. So as soon as the user decides to switch to another app, it can get and will get evicted faster than usually with installed apps. When it comes to local storage, you want to probably store data locally because you need to make sure that you access all that, and sometimes the user comes back to the app and it's important to actually have that available. So we made it available to the local private storage. Also, there's the cache directory. There's a cookie API available, and you can use the shared preferences, as well as your database that's already existing and internal content providers. But you don't get access to external storage or your exported content providers. That is, again, to make sure that the users are in a secure environment. When it comes to migrating user data from the instant app to the installed app, there we provided an API for that as well, which relies on you declaring the target sandbox version 2 in your installed application. And how does it work? That's the cookie API. It's available to both instant app and installed app. It allows you to store and retrieve user data when you migrate, or as a replacement for other ways to store user data that you already used. How does it work? It's, again, a straightforward API. You check whether the cookie that you want to store is small enough to fit the cookie jar, and then you update your instant app cookie. The instant app cookie is a byte array, and it's available through both the package manager as well as the support package manager. On the other end, all you have to do is get from the package manager, get back the instant app cookie, and then convert it to the data to the data type that you can work with. And when you're done, you can clear up after yourself and clear the instant app cookie. That is all I had to say on the part of instant app for today. But there's a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind when it comes to when it comes to looking up for instant apps. One of the things is you probably want to go to the g.co/instantapps or developer.com/instantapps. Also, if you have questions, post them on Stack Overflow. And if you see that there's samples missing, or if you want to contribute to samples for Android instant apps, please file an issue on Google Samples. And there's also a couple of other presentations that are definitely highly recommendable for Android instant apps. One of them is the Introduction to Instant Apps, which gives you more of a high-level overview of what they actually are than this presentation. Also, Building an Android Instant App, which takes you through the modularization process more hands-on than this presentation as well. Also, adding to that is the best practices to slim down your app size session, which is really great to get a great overview over all the tools that we made available for making sure that your app size is as small as possible without sacrificing any of your users' experience. Thank you very much. That's all from me.